The playoffs are here, and you can predict the action all the way to the finals with FanDuel Predicts. Predict the spread, the total points, and even the game-winning moments that make the playoffs. Sign up and get a $25 bonus with FanDuel Predicts.
Offered by FanDuel Prediction Markets, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant. 18-plus bonus is non-withdrawable and expires 7 days after receipt. Trading derivatives involves significant risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Manage your activity with their consumer protection tools. Restrictions apply. See terms at FanDuel.com/predicts/bonus-offer-terms.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Taxi!
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, we have someone with us who's been on before and has tremendous insights about global affairs. And I'm talking about Dr. Zhudi Jasser, who is the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. His bio reads he's an American religious and political commentator and a medical doctor. My mother would argue with that greatly. She'd say, you put that you're a doctor first, then you can put everything after that. But he really is he's very refreshing because he offers thoughts that you don't hear in enough places. So Dr. Jasser, great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. Always appreciate catching up with you.
And can we break that down? American religious and political commentator and medical doctor, which is your day job. But I explain, American religious and political commentator.
Well, my whole life I've been very dedicated to not only being an American, served in the Navy 11 years, but after 9/11 really felt that we needed to treat the core problem, which is not a symptom, which is terrorism, but the ideology. And as somebody who loves my faith and has a very strong relationship with God, I've always felt that the people making money from Islam are the problem. The Islamists, the theocrats, the institutional Islamists, and the people not making money from Islam, but doctors, attorneys, engineers, the rest of us who have real livings are the ones who need to sort of get back a hold of our faith. So I have a strong relationship with God, but a very contentious relationship with organized Islam and the institutions of Islam. So that's really where that comes from.
So clarify for us some of the misunderstandings about your faith. I have a lot of, Rabbi and I have a lot of Muslim and leaders, imams that we interact with and have a wonderful collaboration towards dealing with the issues within our society. Clear up some of the misunderstandings, if you will.
Well, actually, I'm glad you asked it that way because I'll tell you, I think it's an apologetic for Muslims to say that these are misunderstandings. I think the Muslims that believe it's misunderstandings feel that they just want to stick their head in the sand and pretend there's no problems. And the reality is we have a massive cancer. And as a doctor, I will tell you that the patient Islam continues to exist as a faith despite Muslims, not really because of Muslims. We've really not taken back the leadership of our communities. We've not addressed the core problems. Our faith has been stuck in the 12th, 13th century without any modernization. And if you look at most of the Muslim-majority countries, terrorism and radicalism, be it from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Islamist, Khomeinist in Iran, or the militant theocrats, if you will, we've come to the West. Many of our families, like mine, have escaped that, but yet we've come here to celebrate, to practice our faith personally in a Judeo-Christian culture in the West. But we've not really brought our own faith into the 21st century. So it's not really misunderstanding. It's a sense of now the misunderstanding is that is Islam reconcilable with democracy? I have a debate that I gave a speech at Oxford in October 2024, and I said, as somebody who loves my faith, currently Islam is not compatible with democracy, but do I think it can be? Absolutely. That's why we've been doing all this work, and that just like our founding fathers felt that there can be no establishment of religion through government, and they worked against the Church of England and wanted to separate church and state in 1789 in our Constitution. Islam has not gone through that same revolution, and that's why I think what's so important about what's happening in Iran. It's the first time in 1,000 years now that Islam in that many centuries has had an actual process of defeating theocracy, which is really what we need to wake up and do.
So if that's
Doctor, go ahead, Rabbi.
So if that's the case, what is a plausible solution, or is there one, to the current crisis? Is it, war? War is the only solution? There's no diplomatic solution? What do you see as, how do we navigate through this, given the mentality of the other side that many cases would prefer to die than live?
Okay, so number one is you need to have a correct trajectory historically. So, if you look at the 30 Years' War in Europe, there was 10 million people almost that perished within 30 years in every country in Europe that was fighting against theocrats. And so the process in the Islamic world, I'm not sure it's going to mirror that, but it's going to be, similarly internal revolutions within each country, and each one's going to have different stages. That process is going to evolve, and every country will have its own type of evolution, but the historical arc will be the same, is that if the West takes side within the House of Islam, and it's not only that we're against radical Islam and against terrorism, but we advance what we're for, and we have an offense to take the side of the dissidents within Iran and within Syria and those who are fighting against theocracy versus, I was listening to Ambassador Barak yesterday talk about, he's the ambassador to Turkey. And I can't believe he's an American. He's basically saying, well, the Middle East has always had dictators. They're going to have dictators. And, we can't pretend they're going to become democracies. And, I'm like, this is an American saying this? America should be advancing the ideas of liberty, should be taking on the Marxist and jihadists of the Chinese Communist Party and the Russian autocrats and others, instead of just sort of doing the Game of Thrones thing we did in the 20th century and helping people who really don't share our worldview. So I think if you look at the arc of history, if we start weighing in the free market of ideas on the ground in these countries, I think it'll be headed in the better direction. I think the theocrats and the autocrats will be defeated because at the end of the day, people want to be free, and the Marxist jihadist axis will be defeated by liberty. But if we take a pass and we don't start pushing Muslims to take ownership for liberty and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I think the autocrats will win and the theocrats will win.
See, that's important, and that's why I asked in the beginning for clarification, because the majority of people on the ground, John Q. Citizen, they have bought into so much of the rhetoric that they think that the Muslim community, the Islamic community, is monolithic. But they're not, because you talk about America for Islam, pushing an agenda that shares the values of the United States. Speak to that difference.
Yeah, now, it's so important because, I, as an American, was educated and rooted in liberal thought, in classical liberalism, where I did not feel that I could push my ideas upon others and understood individualism versus tribalism, understood the need to have free speech. And as I accepted God, understood that I needed to question God first before I felt that I could accept him. So all of these types of thought processes as we mature, long before I could really understand the translations of the Quran and get into the theological arguments of various schools of Sharia thought, I had a strong relationship with God that my parents taught me through my superego and my conscience, etc. So to those who believe that Islam is irreconcilable, I would tell them, if the recipe was wrong, to say that somehow we get our values from the book is just erroneous. Most of us bring our values to the book, and we then interpret it in a way that's modern, and we can then start to say, well, what applies to today, what applies to the 7th century, etc. So that's part of the liberal education.
So let me ask you, given the clear choices how people would prefer freedom, how do you explain this movement in America where you have young people siding with Iran and faulting America for the problem?
That is such an important question. And again, it runs to the core is why do smart people become bigots and anti-Semitic? It's because of moral inversion. Because all of a sudden, it is no longer, we've lost what's right and wrong. It's no longer, those are the same people who think that, well, extreme socialism is good, so we steal from people in order to give to the poor, so stealing becomes okay. Killing becomes okay because terrorism is now, violence is okay because it's no longer, that's civil disobedience. Even if we're destroying structures and killing innocent people in restaurants or whatever it might be, that's okay because the ends justifies the means. So you've lost, and this gets back to the original question you asked me, which was, why is my faith so important? You cannot bring modern communities and people into the modern age without a moral compass that's rooted in a fear of God and humility. And, I've talked to so many of my religious, mentors in my life, be it Muslim, Jewish, Christian. At the end of the day, what we fear and the reason why we do what's right and wrong is not because of movements, but because we worry about what God wants us to do and we're humble before God. And without
Doctor,
that, you can't have a moral society.
I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but we've got to go to a break. But when we come back, I want to talk about this confusion of conscience that we're experiencing in our society. Stay tuned for more of The Rev and the Rabbi. We'll be right back, right here on Red Apple Radio Networks.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Tasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
And we are speaking with Dr. Zhudi Jasser, who is the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. He's an American religious and political commentator and happens to be a medical doctor.
Happens to be.
Yeah. Well, it comes after all of the other titles,
like
and is also a doctor.
Become a medical doctor.
Yeah.
We wouldn't even ask him how many years it took to get there. But doctor, the culture wars have not merely divided societies. They've disoriented the inner, what you were talking about, moral compass of individuals. And what we're witnessing is not just disagreement over values, but what I call a deeper confusion of conscience, where there's this destabilization of how people even discern right from wrong. We don't agree anymore. We used to have a shared value system where we could say, okay, we agree, that's wrong, that's right. But not anymore, Doctor. Speak to that.
Yeah, and then this is so important, is that the DEI movement, a lot of the identity politic movement was about retribalizing the West. And all of a sudden, the Enlightenment process, de Tocqueville wrote about in his book, he said the reason democracy in America was so successful is that they didn't need military rule because they feared God first. And they had a moral society. They had a very heavy church-going population, much more so than Europe. And thus, since they were a moral society, they didn't need military authority from government, and thus government was for the people and by the people, and separated and rendered under Caesar what is Caesar's and under God what is God's, as the Bible says. So that retribalization of identity politics that is also part of the culture wars is radicalizing our society. And this is what I testified to Congress about when Peter King asked me to testify in 2011. I said, listen, you guys might think this is just about Muslim radicalization and Al-Qaeda and then, as ISIS was coming, et cetera. I said, no, they're going to radicalize the far left, the Democrats, the political movements, et cetera, because radicalization is not something unique to Muslims. And Chief Justice Thomas said it last week in the University of Texas, Austin. He gave a speech about progressivism. And he said progressivism is about basically rendering unto government what actually should be the domain of God, that the progressivists think that rights come from government, not from God. And I was listening to him saying, boy, you could replace the word Islamism with progressivism, and you would basically get the same answer. The Islamists think rights come from Islam or from the government that's Islamic rather than coming from God. So we need normal people in politics. We need normal, moral people in activism in society, and to get back to the roots of Western modernity, which is about the individual rights being protected over the tribe's rights. And that's why America is not a democracy, it's a republic. The Bill of Rights protects every individual because left to their own devices, as Ben Franklin said, three wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner is democracy. So we have to be able to protect the individual.
You know, it's interesting.
But we're redefining terms like justice, freedom, identity. Narratives are changing. Rabbi and I have spoken about this. We are arguing as to who is the victim and who is the oppressor. Because you have those who are protesting, you know, against what's going on the sides of the Palestinians, and they see the Palestinians the oppressors. And then Jews are being, you know, troubled by anti-Semitism, and they see themselves as the victim. How do we decide? What's the higher moral influence on our conscience and our understanding of right and wrong?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and every time we have a debate, we should be able to, in comfort and calmness, talk about what are the facts that we agree on and what are the things we disagree on, and no longer simply, you know, if you look at the conspiracy advocates, they will use terms like obviously or clearly, and without, nobody's even asking questions anymore. It's as if somehow their version of the story is the truth. So first we have to figure out what the facts are, and once we agree on those, see if it's real victimology, if there's real victims, or it's actually fabricated victimization. You know, and you find out now in Israel, for example, so much of the stories were just fabricated about what was actually happening to the Palestinians of Gaza.
You know, it's interesting, Doctor. I've had a number of former Iranian nationals coming to this country, now living here, and saying to me, thank God for Israel. And when you talk to many of the people who can't speak publicly, but privately in Iran, they'll tell you, thank God for Israel. And yet you have so many, Americans included, who will say Israel is causing the problems leading America into this war. I was talking with a senator about the recent vote where they voted against Iron Dome and bulldozers, and she voted for, you know, not against it, but for it. And I said, what's the reason you have so many Democrats voting against it? She said, well, it's anti-Bibi. So I said to her, but we're talking about Iron Dome. We're talking about protecting civilians. How does it make sense that that's against Netanyahu if you're protecting those who are innocent? And for that, there's no answer. So there is this, not moral clarity, but immoral clarity. People see what's right and wrong through such a different lens.
Lens.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Doctor?
It's a parallel moral universe, Doctor.
And they demonized individuals, be it Prime Minister Netanyahu, be it President Trump, and all of a sudden the policy doesn't matter anymore. The reality on the ground doesn't matter anymore. It's all a demonization of President. Thomas Friedman was giving an interview just a couple weeks ago, and he was being asked. They asked him, "Isn't this a good thing that the regime that's slaughtering its own people, killing dissidents, and wreaking terror across the Middle East is ending?" He goes, "Yeah, but the problem is because Netanyahu's doing it and Trump is, it's more of a bad." I'm like, and all of a sudden you saw a full disclosure that it really wasn't about moral clarity. It was about him hating the political partisanship of what was happening, which I think is the reality. And I think eventually it'll become obvious to everybody that Israel is the little America in the Middle East, and the same values that America was founded on in 1789 when our Constitution became real, Israel was founded on in 1948.
And Friedman is regarded by so many as a great political thinker and commentator. And yet when you read that, you said, he doesn't deserve to hold that role. He shouldn't be. You shouldn't have a column, because he's really anti-Israel, anti-America. It's always anti-Trump, Netanyahu. It doesn't matter that people are fighting for freedom and ready to give their lives for freedom. He sees it like what's best. What's best is if Trump loses and Netanyahu loses. I mean, it's crazy. It's simply crazy.
Doctor, I just want to, and just again, another point of clarification. Just because you support the nation of Israel, that doesn't necessarily mean you agree with all of its tactics and all of its policies and decisions. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Like
every
America.
country has its own. Every country has its own internal debates, and I may have some disagreements. I'm an American, and I will have my debates on American policy, but I will not allow, at the end of the day, I think that it is in America's interest to not only support our ally Israel, but it is the strongest ally we have in the world because of the neighborhood it lives in and because of its history of what led it to exist post-Holocaust. And we need to support that because just as our founding father, George Washington, talked about the special relationship he had with the Jews in America in the late 18th century, there's a special relationship that America has with the Jews in Israel that we need to protect, because if we do not, as every time in history has shown in the thousands of years of Jewish history, it will end up destroying the rest of our civilization if we don't recognize anti-Semitism when
Israel and America cherish dissent. If you pick up an Israeli paper, you will see major disagreements. But at the end of it all, both sides love the country. There are people who disagree with American policies, but yet love the country. I think one of the problems we're facing today is you have those who don't love the country, who would like to see a different administration, a different way of dealing with issues, and all of a sudden the enemy becomes the person who is the friend. There's been a total transformation. Israel is now the enemy in the eyes of many, when it has been a great friend, liberating people.
Yeah, but Rabbi, what the doctor said is important, and you and I have had this conversation. The fact that we can support Israel, right, and at the same time, it doesn't mean that we agree totally with all of its tactics, all of its policies.
Isn't that true in America? Because it's true of any democracy.
But you know what it is? If you say you support Israel, that means you support everything that Israel has done, the government has done, and that is not true. It's not true there. It's not true here in America.
It's a double standard. Doctor, there are people listening saying, I want to help this guy. I want to promote his organization. What should they do?
Yeah, our organization website is AIF Democracy, AIF as in forum, democracy.org. And, I'm also running for Congress, which is important. And I think we need folks that can flip the script. And our website for my congressional campaign on a district that's a swing district here in Arizona is Z4AZ.com.
Okay.
Excellent. Doctor, always a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you so much.
Rabbi?
Yeah. No, I've known Dr. Jasser for many, many years, and he says things that others are afraid to say. And he's a person of great strength, great courage, and I'm one of the admirers, as many others are.
Yeah. Thank you, Doctor, for being on the program.
Thank you. God bless you. Appreciate it.
God bless. And we've come to the close of another episode of The Rev and the Rabbi right here on Sunday morning. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, God bless.
Security program on spreadsheets, new regulations piling up, and audit dread? It's time for Vanta. Vanta automates security and compliance, brings evidence into one place, and cuts audit prep by 82%. Less manual work, clearer visibility, faster deals, zero chaos. Call it compliance, or call it compliance. Get it? Join the 15,000 companies using Vanta to prove trust. Go to vanta.com/com.